All right, so this is the app we're going to build today, essentially a special calculator app. So let's look at what the final product's going to be. It's going to be Let's Begin. We're going to add a little back button in the corner, so don't worry about that, so we can go back to the home page. And this will be different from the last calculator we built in that instead of doing the conventional plus, minus, multiply, divide, we're going to do like n factorial, kilograms to pounds, kilometers to miles, years to seconds, and then we'll do like sine, cosine, tan, and we'll have this switch over here so that we can do the arc sine, arc cosine, arc tan if we switch it off, right? So for example, if I do like 6 factorial, it'll go to that number, right? And so let's clear it and then go like 2 kilometers is, well, 0.2 kilometers is 0.0125 miles, right? And so on, right? So we're going to build it out together. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start off with File, New Project, and we'll start off with iOS and Single View Application. And we'll hit Next. All right, and I'm going to call this one W2 Special Calculator. And have com.prog39856, or whatever you want to call it. So language is Swift. You probably have Objective-C since you've done so many Objective-C apps. We're going to do a Swift app. Now you can, of course, mix Objective-C with Swift in your projects. That's not a problem at all, but we're going to do a Swift project here. Universal device, core data, everything's unchecked. Everything's off here. We're just going to do a simple special calculator. Hit Next, and give it a home. All right. So from a programming perspective or from the Xcode perspective, your settings have not changed, right? So you have all these same settings you had before in Objective-C. So you have like com.prog39856. Whatever, right? You have your version, your build number, your team number, all your provisioning profiles will be managed here. What deployment target, device orientation, status bar style, all those settings you had before in the Objective-C projects are still here. Nothing's changed. The only difference now is that you see a bunch of .swift files. So look at appdelegate.swift. You have your same app delegate as before, but now it's in Swift. So it gives you that explanation of what each method does. So like I was saying in the past, did finish launching with options is the most important or most common one that you're going to use. So you would put your launch settings or any important connections you want to do to the app. You put in did finish launching so that at launch time, at least those things get done, like in database connection, for example. We have here viewcontroller.swift. So we have here our typical UI view controller. So like I was saying before, class view controller extends UI view controller, right? We have here our view.load. Notice that there's a keyword override here, and override did receive memory warning. So we're basically adding the keyword override to any methods we override from the parent class. Right, so that's why we have override func view.load. Right, and then we have launch screen and main storyboard. I'll start with launch screen because we'll do our simple loading message. We'll throw that on. So storyboards stay the same. Nothing different from Objective-C. So I'm going to look for a label just to put the word loading. Right, and maybe center it, maybe increase the font. Right, so that'll be my launch screen. Do a Command S to save that. And then moving over to main storyboard, we're going to do 2 pages. So I'm going to hide my document view for a sec. We'll have view controller. I'm going to add the second page right off the bat, so we have both there. And I'll worry about creating the view controller for that second page later. So I have here 2 view controllers. Right here, I'm going to just put a label and a button on the home page. So starting with a label. And call this W2 Special Calculator. And center it. Maybe increase the font. Let's change the color. There. And put a button. That just says let's begin. There. So that'll be my home page. Now the next step is we'll populate all the information we need on the second page. We'll do our connecting last. So let's start with a label at the top. Then we'll throw on a whole bunch of buttons. So 2 labels actually. All right. So that will be, let's put a simple word like calculate. And the rest are buttons. Well, actually, no, one more label. I'll leave it as the word label. Now I'll put my buttons on. All right, so that will be the first digit. Make it smaller. Maybe I'll throw a back button in the corner. This first button I threw on will be number 7. I'll just do a copy and paste. So Command C and Command V. There. So at 7, we'll do 8 and then the 9. And this will be n factorial. And now we can just copy these again. So Command click. Again. And then I'll do it again, but get rid of that one. This will just be for sine, cosine, tan. There. So I'll finish updating the buttons. And then this button will be kilogram to pounds. We got 1, 2. And this will be kilometers to miles. And then this one will be a C for clear. That will have the 8 be the 0. And the 9 be a decimal, or a period. And this n factorial will be years to seconds. So I'll put YR-SEC. There, that fits. And these last 7, 8, 9s will be sine, cos, tan. Right? And so we'll put a switch with 2 labels. So I'll put the switch in. Put one here. And one on the other side. This one will be arc. And this will be like normal. There. I'll just do Command S to save. We're going to give each button an ID number. So we can simplify the number of event handling that we have to do. Instead of having 1 event handler per button, we'll have like 2, maybe 3 event handlers in total. All right, so starting with 0, and looking at the tag option here, it's 0. Now that's fine. We're going to let that be 0. So numbers 0 to 9 will be tag 0 to 9. So if I look at 1, it's going to change that to a 1. 2 will be a 2. 3 is 3. That's 4. And they're all ints anyway. Okay, so 0 to 9 will be just 0 to 9. And the tags are an int anyway. So then the other values we'll have to add on ourselves. So for example, the period will be -1. And the clear will be -2. And then sine, cos, and tan will be 10, 11, 12. All right, so 10, 11, 12. And then n factorial will be 13. Kilograms to pounds will be 14. Kilometers to miles, 15. Years to seconds will be 16. So all my buttons have a tag associated with them. So it'll make it easier for event handling. Okay, so now that we have all of the tags in place, what we want to do now is actually start writing some code. So we created this new view controller here. We dragged it onto the screen, but we never really create a class for it. So what we're going to do now is just add a new file. So we're going to right click or two-finger click on the trackpad and go new file. And it'll be a Cocoa Touch class. So just like in Objective-C we had Cocoa Touch class, we're still going to do Cocoa Touch class here. Don't be fooled by Swift file or the other options, Objective-C file. We'll keep it simple to Cocoa Touch class. And we'll hit next. And it'll be a subclass of UI View Controller. Language will be Swift. And I'm going to call this Calculate View Controller. And hit next and give it a home. All right, and so it populates with the view controller that we need. So what we'll do is we'll start by defining some variables here, and then we'll do our connections, and then we'll come back and write some code. And that way, let's at least try and get the page navigation up and running for this. So for Calculate View Controller, we have a couple of variables that we're going to need. The rest will be event handlers. So let's start off by defining the label that's going to display our digits. So we'll say @IBOutlet. So notice it's @IBOutlet here, right? As opposed to just IBOutlet in Objective-C. We're going to say week var and LBL display will be the name of the variable. It'll be a type UI label, so we'll extend UI label with a question mark. And then we'll have @IBOutlet week var, we'll say, I'll call this one SWTrig for trigonometry. It'll be a UI switch question mark. And then the third variable will be that string that we're going to use to keep track of the digits before we fish it out to the label. So we'll say var, call it str display, and have it extend string. So notice we're not using ns string here. We're using just string. All right. So knowing this, let's focus on just getting this and page navigation all connected up. So we can easily navigate from home page to the second page. What we want to do though first is get that back button up and running. And to do that, we need to have our unwind segue. So we're going to switch over to viewcontroller.swift, and we'll add a new method down here. It'll also be an IB action, so we'll still use @IB action. And we'll say func, call it unwind to this view controller. Its argument, now unfortunately with this, it doesn't autocomplete so nicely as it did in Objective-C. So I have to type stuff out manually. So I'll say segue, and then UI storyboard segue. All right, so at least we have our unwind segue. And remember that this argument should be of type UI storyboard segue and not just UI storyboard, because you won't be able to create that segue when you are when you're doing your thing. Okay, so now that we have everything we have, let's connect things up and just get the page navigation up and running. So just Command S to save, switch back to main storyboard. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the Let's Begin button working. So holding down Control, I'm going to Control drag, do a present modally. And then the back button, I'm going to Control drag to that exit icon. And choose unwind to this view controller. But what you'll notice now, at least with Swift, is that as you're picking out methods, you'll see that the names just got longer, because it used to be in the Objective-C world, it was unwind to this view controller and then it was fine. That's all you would see. But now it's actually trying to embed the method names with it. So, the variable names with it. So like unwind to this view controller with segue. So that's the argument that's passed in. Right? So it's It's trying to add more to it, but it's still the same method. All right, so we have that. Now, since we're here, let's cast view controller as a calculator view controller. And then we can go ahead and connect swtrig and LBL display. All right, now you can go ahead and run this. I'm going to run this as an iPhone 7. Okay, so I have let's begin. Here it is, hit back. So at least we have our page navigation in place. The buttons are still non-functional though. All right, so at this point we have our page navigation in place. Let's write the event handler for getting our buttons to work. All right, so switching to calculate view controller. We're going to start off with creating a method to update the label. So we're going to say func update label. No arguments passed in, no return. All right, and all this is going to be is LBL display dot text equals str display. But you're going to notice that an error pops up. It's not going to be, it's actually not a bad error, because when you get this little error dot with a dot in the middle, the white dot, this is actually not a bad thing, because it's offering you help. So it's not just an error message, it's also an error with a solution. So remember I was talking about optionals and I said optionals are not fun? Well, at least Xcode tries to help you out. So if I click on the dot there, it's saying invalid optional type UI label. Did you mean to use an exclamation mark or a question mark? So it offers the help saying insert a question mark. So at least it's helping you out. So this is saying that it's possible that LBL display could be null or nil. So we want to account for that. We want to be on the safe side of that, or guard for it. And so that's why we have the question mark there. All right, so we're going to create update label, and update label will basically have our it will always fish out whatever is in str display to the screen. All right, so now let's look at view did load. Let's initialize some values, and in particular, we're just going to set the label to be 0. So we're going to say str display equals 0, but like text, and then update label. All right, so all we're going to do is just reset it to 0. And we can just test it by running it and making sure that that label now says 0. All right, so we'll say let's begin. And this says 0 now. So we know that it's a 0. So now we know it's working. All right, so just some simple stuff just to get comfortable, just to get a little bit of Swift going there. But just being able to reset our label from the word label down to 0. So now that's the first step. The next step is let's get the numbers 0 to 9 up and running. So we're going to create an event handler just above update label. So at IB action, func, call it num buttons. And like I said before, it doesn't autocomplete as nicely as it used to in Objective-C, so we have to manually type our arguments in. So I'll say sender, and we'll say UI button. Normally it would be like sender any, but here we're narrowing it down to say only UI buttons can actually run this particular event handler. So what we're going to do here is based on the tag that we set. So earlier on when we set 0 to 9 for the 0 to 9 buttons, we're only going to search for those particular buttons. So we're going to say if sender.tag is greater than or equal to 0, and sender.tag is less than 10. Can't forget our curlies. Then we'll say str display is equal to str display dot appending. So notice that it's saying appending now. So there's appending and there's appending format. But if you recall, it used to be like string by appending string, string by appending format. So this is a little bit of the grand renaming in action where they're dropping some of the words that are unnecessary. Like you don't need to see the word string by appending because we know it's a string, right? There's no point. So we're seeing the method appending and appending format. Because I'm inserting a number, I'm going to go appending format and apply my printf knowledge. So appending format, the first argument will just be in quotes a %d to indicate an int. And the second one will just be my argument name, which is just sender.tag. And then afterwards, update label. So at this point, we have the event handler in place for our digits. The only thing left to do is connect this event handler to all of my digit buttons, 0 to 9. So what we want to do is switch back to our storyboard, main storyboard, and do that. Now we should see, by highlighting the yellow circle for Calculate View Controller, we should see num buttons, but notice it says num buttons with sender. So again, it's expanding on the names of the methods that you're working with here. So I'm going to connect this up to all my digits. So there's 7. Touch up inside. And then just do it for 7, 8, and 9. There. And let's give it a run. All right, so there we go. 9, 8. Ooh, 8 didn't catch. I'll check that. 7, 4, 5, 6, 3, 2, 1, 0. So everything except 8 didn't catch. And it looks like we didn't get the 8. I'll check again. That's interesting because the 8 is highlighted. Oh, because if you look, the error, it says touch up outside. So my mistake. I chose the wrong one. So I'm going to delete that and connect it again. Touch up inside. Try again. Let's begin, and 8s work now. Okay, so at this point we have our first event handler in num buttons. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the remaining ones. I'm going to start with the side here. So n factorial, then kilograms to pounds, kilometers to miles, years to seconds. So I'm going to start with creating an event handler called action buttons. So I'm going to say at IB action, func, and action buttons. Sender will be a UI button. All right. I'm going to start with n factorial. So I'm going to create a event handler for calculating factorial. So just above it, I'm going to create a new method. So func calc factorial. Now it'll pass in an argument. So we'll say number int. And it'll return back an int. All right, so that'll be my factorial method. So to do the factorial, just to recap, so 5 factorial is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 4 factorial is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. So we're going to write a little while loop to do that calculation for us. So first thing we'll do is we'll say var num is equal to number. All right. Then we're going to create another var. So var ans for answer. It'll be of type int. And we'll just set it equal to 1. Now, a lot of times people ask, well, why don't you set it to 0? Because the way we're going to do the math is that you'll end up with 0 times everything will just end up your answer is 0 all the time. So we're setting as 1 just to times it by 1. So now, all we're going to do is just say while number is greater than 1. We'll say answer star equals number or num. Sorry, that's should be num, not number. And then num. Now I want to say num minus minus. All right, because that's the logical thing to say. From all the languages we've worked with, that's the logical thing to say, but it's giving me an error, and it's giving me a little helpful hint because of the dot in the middle. So when I do num minus minus, let's click on say, hey, we can't do a minus minus, and therefore, so minus minus and plus plus have been removed from Swift 3.0 onwards. I do not know why, they just have been. So we have to go with minus equals 1. One sec. All right, so now the last thing to do is just return ans. All right, so we have our calculate factorial method in place. Now it's just a matter of using it. So inside action buttons, we're going to combine all of the actions that are there. Now this will get a bit weird because, well, we have a whole bunch of different calculations we're doing. We have decimal numbers we're working with. So, but the calculate factorial is an int. Everything else is a decimal. So we're going to work with doubles all the way through, and we'll just cast to from an int to a double for calculate factorial in particular. So what I'm going to do is just say var ans is equal to 0.0. And then we'll say let num equal str display. And first off, let's let it see if it'll accept that. It does, interestingly enough. But we want to, but by default, it's going to take it as a string. So we need to convert that to a double. So we're going to cast it as a double. And it's accepting it. No, it's not. So let's see what it wants. It wants us to use an optional. It wants us to use an exclamation mark to say we're going to guarantee a value all the time. So now we have two variables. The warnings mean that they're unused. So we'll get to that in a moment. What we're going to do now is start with calculate factorial. So we're going to say, we're going to use a switch for sender.tag. It's easier than writing a whole bunch of if statements. And we'll use cases for everything. So we'll start with factorial. Factorial's ID or our tag was 13. So we'll say case 13. If that's the case, then we'll say ANS is equal to calc factorial, passing in num. But here's the thing. Num's a double. It's expecting an int, so to cast the num to an int. Right? But then the answer is going to be a double. It needs to be a double. The answer is going to be an int, but it needs to be a double. So we're going to cast this to double. There. I think we got all our brackets in place. The only thing missing is that it wants an optional. Let's see where it suggests the optional to be for num. There we go. All right, and then we'll say break. Now, for now, we'll just do the switch for factorial. We have to put in a default before we close off the curly. That's what it's probably complaining about, so we'll just do that. Default, break. There. And let's update our label. So we'll say str display is equal to ANS, but ANS is a double. So to convert it back to a string, and then update label. All right, so this is just one function that we're doing here. All right, so we have this. Let's connect up action buttons to n factorial and give it a try here. So we have n factorial. We have here action buttons with sender. I'm just going to connect that up to n factorial. Touch up inside. Test out n factorial. Okay, so let's begin. 6 factorial is 720. All right, we can't clear it. If I try typing 5, it just joins it. So we're not ready for testing anything else. We know that 6 factorial works. All right, so moving on, we have here, we did factorial. The next thing to do, we'll do the other ones, which are like kilometers to miles, pounds to kilograms, and so on. So let's look back at main storyboard. Let's see what the next button is. The next button is kilograms to pounds. So just above default, I'm going to say case 14. And I'll say ANS equals num divided by 2.2. And then break. In fact, while we're at it, let's do the other one. So case 15 for kilometers to miles. So we'll say ANS is equal to num divided by 1.6. Break. All right. So converting kilograms to pounds, we have to divide by 2.2. Right. That's what the 14 is for. And the tag was 14 that we put on for that button. For kilometers to miles, we're dividing by 1.6. Right. And so the tag for that particular button was 15. And in fact, while we're at it, let's do case 16, which is years to seconds. This is a long one. So this one in particular is, I'm just going to do the math for it as opposed to just giving a big number. So it's ANS is equal to num. Now this is, so the number given is years. We want to convert that to seconds. So we have X number of years. So num number of years, which is actually times 365 days times 24 hours per day times 60 minutes per hour times 60 seconds per minute. That gives us our answer. And then break. So now we've done kilograms to pounds, kilometers to miles, and years to seconds. Before we run and test these three out, let's do the clear and the decimal point, just so that we at least we can at least clear it instead of having to stop and start, stop and start. So the clear was -2. So we'll say case -2. Then str display, we'll reset it back to 0 and break. And the decimal point was -1. So case -1. And we'll do a str display plus equals a dot. Now it's going to complain. And let's see why. Cannot convert string. And in fact, it's actually easier to do an str display exclamation mark. And I think we have enough to test. So we'll switch over to main storyboard, connect all those up. So we have your action buttons connected to the kilograms to pounds, touch up inside, kilograms to miles, touch up inside, years to seconds, touch up inside, and then do that for the C and the dot. And let's run it. All right, so let's say 6 kilograms to pounds is 2.7. I'll clear it, so we can clear it again. And 1 kilometer is 0.0625 miles. And let's say 3 years, I'll clear it. We'll say 3 years. And actually, there's a bit of a bug there, so I'm going to look at that after. Let's say 3 years is equal to that many seconds. And begin, we'll say 6 kilometers to miles, 3.75 miles. So that's better. So if I hit clear, it resets to 0.0. So I think we've introduced a bug into the code we need to fix. So looking at what happened there, because it converts to 0.0, which is not right. Now, here's the problem. Here's what happened with str display. So it went to 0, so we reset it to 0, but then it goes and becomes string ANS, but ANS is a double, which poses a problem when we're resetting, right? And then we have to update label. So our clear button is not perfect. We have to fix that. We'll come back to it after. All right, so we have introduced a new problem here. A couple of new problems. And let's recap what they are. So if I say 3 kilometers to miles, hit clear, goes to 0.0, but then if I try typing, it just joins to the decimal. So I'm stuck there. Another problem that's introduced is that if I go 3 decimal, it just resets to 0. So 2 problems have been introduced to this code here. So we have to fix that. So we're going to cheat a little bit. And starting with the decimal space, I'm going to bypass. The problem is that it's actually this line of code, the str display. That's the problem. It's casting to 0.0. We don't want that. So we're going to say update label and return to get out of there. And the same thing above. So I'm going to get rid of this break statement, update label, and return. That'll fix that. So if I run now, okay, so if I say 3.3 years to seconds is that big number, hit clear, it's a 0, which is what we want. So I can say like 6 factorial, 720, or 9 factorial, which is that number, 362,880. All right, so now we have n factorial kilograms to pounds, kilometers to miles, years to second are clear, and our dot up and running. The only thing left now is sine, cos, and tan. So we're going to introduce cases for sine, cos, and tan. And those in particular were tag numbers 10, 11, and 12. Right? So those are the remaining ones to work with here. So I'm going to choose those below the -1. So I'm going to say case 10. Now, we have a little switch. And that switch, going back to the storyboard for a sec, it has a state, on or off. Right? It has on or off, which is basically true or false. So if it's on or true, we're going to do regular sine, cos, and tan. If it's off or false, we're going to do the arc sine, arc cos, and arc tan. So switching back to calculate view controller, we can use the nice little question mark colon operator to do this. So we'll say ans is equal to swtrig dot is on, and we'll say say equals true, or just that on its own, question mark. So if it's true, we'll run the sine of num. If it's false, we'll do the a sine of num. And let's see how many complaints come from this. So let's see what it suggests. So actually we have that already. I don't think that's the issue here. It's actually num. It wants us to put exclamation marks here for each of these nums. And that will cure it. And then we'll put a break at the end of it. And do the same thing for 11. So case 11, swtrig question mark dot is on equals true. So if it is, we'll do the cos of num. Otherwise, a cos of num. And finally, case 12. So tan. A tan. So now we have sine, cosine, tan in place with all of our optionals in place in the right place. All that's left to do is connect things up and run it. All right, so switching over to main storyboard. And we still have our action buttons. We still have some space, so let's connect those up to tan. So touch up inside. Cos. Touch up inside. And sine. Touch up inside. All right, and we run it. All right, so let's begin. I'll start with because it's radians, so we'll have to do like a pi over 2, which is 1.7. Just guessing. The sine of that, yeah, close to 1. All right, I'll hit clear. Let's do 1.7 again for cos and see where that is close to, well, a little bit below 0, so that sounds about right. And then for tan, so 1.7, this might be interesting, negative 7.69. Okay, so it actually did cross. Maybe I'll try 1.6. Negative 34. So it is working for sine, cosine, tan. Let's see what arcsine. So let's see what arcsine produces. So 1.7. Arcsine is not a number. There you go. So that's working at least. All right. In fact, let's try and do like an 88 n factorial. Ooh, it got mad at me. It crashed because it got really big. So I wanted to have some fun with it. So we know that this is not perfect, right? There's some work to be done on this. N factorial, it cannot handle really large factorials like 88 factorial. And also decimal numbers, right? So we didn't do any error checking for just having a decimal. In fact, let's see what happens. Let's see what it thinks to do for just putting a decimal without any numbers on the other side of that decimal. All right, so let's say 3 decimal and just do kilometers to miles. Oh, okay, I guess it treated it as 0. So at least it's smart enough to cast. All right, so at least it's smart enough to cast it as a 0.0. All right, so the exercise today, the purpose was just get comfortable with Swift, get comfortable with creating a project in Swift, doing event handling. Now we're seeing what it was in Objective-C and now what it looks like in Swift. We're seeing optionals are really strange and they're throwing all these question marks, exclamation marks all over the place and not really sure knowing why, just knowing that Xcode told me to. So that's why we're putting these characters in and combining event handlers together. So that was the focus of today's exercise.